Moon Letter, astrological podcast.
Sedna, Dwarf, Planet and Goddess by Ben Belinsky. Sedna is a dwarf planet that orbits out at the farthest reaches of the solar system. She gets her name from the Inuit goddess who is the guardian of the ocean creatures. Here we look at her myth in its cultural context, her astronomy and her astrological influence. There are many versions of Sedna's story told in different parts of the Inuit world. This version comes from the book Oh, What a Blow That Phantom Gave Me by Canadian anthropologist Edmund Carpenter. Sedna is a young woman whose father becomes impatient with her because her suitors always reject her or she rejects them. She's finally tricked into an arranged marriage with a man who seems elegant, wealthy and kind, but as soon as she travels with him back to his home, he turns out to be a shape-shifting sorcerer who enslaves and abuses her. When her father comes to visit her, she begs him to take her home. But when her husband realizes she has escaped, he turns into a raven and flies after them, creating an almighty storm that threatens to sink their boat. Her father, afraid for his life as the waves crash around them, throws Sedna overboard. She manages to cling on to the sides of the boat, while her father, in panic, bashes at her hands with his oar to get her to let go, severing the joints of her fingers. When she continues to cling on, he bashes her hands again, severing more of her fingers, but she's still clinging on by the crook of her arms. Her father, in desperation, uses his oar to bash at her head, gouging out one of her eyes, till finally she lets go of the side of the boat and falls into the sea. Sedna, fingerless, one-eyed and betrayed, sinks into the frigid depths of the Arctic Ocean. The joints of her fingers have transformed into sea creatures, seals, whales, fish and walruses. She is now a goddess, and her home is the bottom of the sea, from where she rules all creatures. It is her will or whim to send animals forth to be taken by hunters. Some hunters, those who have shown respect for slain animals, will be fortunate. For others, they will return empty-handed. Sedna has withheld life from them, for it is impossible for them and their families to survive without the food, clothing and fuel that come from the creatures she rules. Of all the spirits of the Inuit, she is the most feared, as she controls human survival and destiny. The final part of her story tells of the journey of a shaman who has to visit Sedna's home beneath the ocean to release the soul of a dead person. In Inuit culture, it was the role of the shaman to cure the sick and save the dying, untangling the timelines that had led to the sickness or death. If he failed and the patient died, their soul went beneath the sea to Sedna's home. The shaman would then follow, journeying on the sound of his drum. He had to get through the maze that led to her home and get past the snarling dog that guarded the entrance. He would then try to reason with Sedna to explain that she had taken life without cause. She would ignore him. He would then beg for pity, but she would return his pleas with contemptuous laughter. In anger he would threaten her, twisting her arm and hitting her, but she was not afraid. He would then try to appeal to her vanity, combing her tangled hair, but she would remain unrelenting. Finally, he would raise his drum and sing of life. Sometimes Sedna would be touched by his song and moved by his singing. She would then release the soul of the dead person, and the shaman would return with it to the land of the living, but only sometimes. The dwarf planet Sedna, with a diameter of 1,000 kilometers, was discovered in 2003. Her orbit is wildly elliptical, taking her from as close as 11.4 billion kilometers, or 76 astronomical units, and as far out as 140 billion kilometers, 928 astronomical units. That's way beyond Neptune, beyond Pluto and its associated Plutinos, beyond the Kuiper Belt, far, far out in the Oort cloud, taking around 11,400 years to orbit the Sun. That's way beyond the human lifespan, beyond even the durations of civilizations. In Earth time, one Sedna cycle ago sees the end of the last glacial period, known colloquially as the Ice Age. During the Ice Age, Canada and the northern United States were completely covered in ice. The Scandinavian ice sheet reached the northern parts of the British Isles, Germany, Poland, and Russia. In addition, sea levels were lower. The British Isles were still part of the European continent. Sri Lanka was attached to India by a land bridge. The Japanese archipelago was still connected to Asia. Australia and New Guinea were part of a larger landmass called the Sahul continent. The end of the Ice Age meant the retreat of glaciers and the rising of sea levels. The megafauna, mammoths and saber-toothed cats, became extinct. It's supposed that Homo sapiens survived the terrible cold thanks to their omnivorous diet, and also because they had clothing, were able to build dwellings, and knew how to control fire. Eventually they transitioned from nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles to more settled communities. 11,400 years. Let's try and get a sense of the scale of that. Back in the days before telescopes, the furthest out planet visible with the naked eye was Saturn, with the longest orbital period of 29.5 years. All the other planets fall within that span. Jupiter with almost 12 years, Mars with 2 years, and then Venus and Mercury, whose orbits are fractions of the Earth's year at 225 days and 88 days respectively. All these are within the human lifespan. This has, of course, increased over the centuries. In the Paleolithic, life expectancy was around 33 years. You'd have had your Saturn return, you'd probably already become a grandparent, and that was it. Any older than that, assuming you've survived giving birth multiple times, survived attacks from predators, injury from hunting accidents, malnutrition, and incurable infections, and you're an elder. By the 19th century, average life expectancy had only increased to 44 years. So, from an astrological point of view, you'd have had your half-Uranus return at age 42. In fact, Uranus, with its orbital period of 84 years, has come to represent the human lifespan. Then, by 2023, the average human life expectancy had increased to 78, thanks to scientific and medical advances. Average life expectancy, of course, varies from country to country, from Hong Kong with 85.5 years to Nigeria with 54.5. In the US it was 79.3, in the UK it was 81.3. Beyond Uranus we come to Neptune, with its 163-year orbital period, and if you're lucky, you'll reach your half-Neptune return at around age 80. I'll let you know when I get there. And then there's Pluto, now termed a dwarf planet, but nonetheless still packing quite a punch in terms of astrological influence. While Pluto's orbit is 248 years, it is, however, quite elliptical, which means that some of us may get to experience a Pluto half-return. Again, I'll let you know. But out past Saturn, we're not talking about individual lifespans now. We're looking at the longer cycles of cultural change. As well as having an influence on the human individuation process, Uranus is associated with technological developments, and with Uranus heading into Gemini, we should see an even greater acceleration of technological change. Neptune has had, and continues to have, a subtle yet profound influence on the way we are impacted by images and the media, among other things, while Pluto seems to have an influence on power structures, particularly organized crime and the power of empires. We're seeing this currently with the United States in the throes of its Pluto return. Other solar system bodies with orbital periods around the 250-year mark include a group known as the Plutinos. Cute name. It refers to the minor planets whose orbit is in a 3-to-2 resonance with Neptune. In other words, for every 3 orbits of Neptune, a Plutino will orbit twice. These bodies are recent discoveries whose astrological influence is still being determined. The named Plutinos include Huya, Aron, the binary planet Mors Somnus, Orcus, and Ixion. Beyond Pluto we come to the next level, solar system bodies with orbits around 500 to 1,000 years. One of the best known of these is Eris, which takes around 558 years to go round the Sun. Eris was the Greek goddess of chaos and discord, who is best known for setting off the conflict which led to the Trojan War. Eris, the solar system body, orbits at the crazy angle of almost 44 degrees to the plane of the ecliptic. You're unlikely to find her in the sky among the constellations of the zodiac. She'll either be above or below, against a completely different background of stars. But we can't ignore her. In terms of size, she is in fact only slightly smaller than Pluto. As astrologer Zane Stein points out, Eris's cycle of 558 years resonates with the major changes that the Christian Church has gone through. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE brought about a major shift in power for the Church. One Eris cycle later, the Great Schism of 1054 brought about a break between Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. One Eris cycle later brought about the Protestant Reformation, initiated in 1517 by Martin Luther with his 95 Theses. The next cycle of Eris is due around 2075. Just saying. Also in this group is the solar system body with an orbit of 888 years, named Rumina, after the Roman goddess of breastfeeding. Some believe that Rumina, disguised as a she-wolf, fed Romulus and Remus, the twin founders of Rome. Her orbit of almost 900 years connects with a 900-year climate cycle of warmer and cooler periods, where human societies have mostly prospered during warmer times and struggled during cooler times. While there are some indications of influence on long-term cultural and environmental events, it remains for further study to tell whether solar system bodies such as Eris and Rumina have any influence on human lives, either in the birth chart or by transit. And then we come to Sedna, and the solar system bodies that inhabit the Oort cloud. This is a spherical cloud of comets situated about 50,000 to 100,000 astronomical units from the Sun, or about 1 light-year. To put it another way, it's about 1,000 times the distance from the Sun to Pluto. As we mentioned, Sedna takes about 11,400 years to make an orbit of the Sun. This means that the last time she was in the same position as now, around the 1st degree of Gemini, the Earth was just coming out of the last ice age. In terms of timescale, there is no relation between Sedna's time and the little lives we as humans live on Earth. There is not even any relation to the shifting of cultures or the rise and fall of civilizations or religions. In my understanding, Sedna's influence is at the level of species survival. For her, a human life has as much importance as that of a whale, a seal, an ox, or a flea. It doesn't matter if the individual lives or dies. What matters is the survival of the species. Look again at her story. Sedna is betrayed and rejected, and sinks to the icy depths of the Arctic Ocean to be transformed into the guardian of the sea creatures. I hesitate to use the word mother, as there is very little maternal in the traditional sense about her. If one of her children were to be born defective or deformed, she would let it die, because what is important is the continuation of the species. For Sedna, there is no point in making the sacrifice of time or energy to preserve a life that is no use to itself or to the community. She is completely devoid of sentimentality. For her, to say that every human life is sacred and that each individual life must be preserved at any cost is meaningless. She doesn't care about your soul. That's your problem. If sacrificing the life of one individual allows the survival of the species, then so be it. There are many different tellings of the Sedna myth. In some, Sedna is described as an unwanted daughter cast into the sea by her father, or she was an orphan nobody wanted, or a mother abandoned by her children, but in each case she was someone abandoned by her family for their own safety and survival. But this is not just myth. The traditional life of the Inuit in the frozen wastes of the Arctic was harsh and unforgiving. They did, in fact, abandon old people. The killing of newborn girls wasn't uncommon, and as one's own family always came first, the position of orphans was precarious. These cruel necessities were normal in Inuit life, forced on them by scarcity. Sedna doesn't care about our sentimental attachments. Ayur namat, as they say in Inuktitut, the language of the Inuit. This word expresses the philosophy that what cannot be changed must be accepted, including the harshness of nature. A translation would be, it cannot be otherwise. The Inuit accept life on its own terms. They do more than just accept. They take on themselves the responsibility for the fact that life is the way it is. There is no answer to the question, why is life like it is? There is no room for explanation. There is no room for belief. Sedna's myth is profound, and there are many resonances. It needs to be told in many different ways in order to encompass its full meaning. But our civilized world cannot deal with this complexity and would reduce the story to something more linear and instantly graspable. The philosophical principle of Ayur namat can be reduced to the logical utilitarianism of English philosopher Jeremy Bentham when he speaks of the greatest good for the greatest number. Or to put it in the words of Spock from Star Trek, logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. I've also read Ayur namat reduced to the ancient Greek philosophers of Stoicism that see passions, anxieties, and insecurities as misguided reactions that ought to be controlled through self-disciplined practice. It can also be reduced to the philosophical pleasantry, advising us not to worry about things we cannot control, describing Ayur namat as quiet acceptance that life unfolds as it must, freeing the mind from unnecessary burdens. But while these simplifications and reductions may contain certain truths, they lack the symbolic richness of the myth. None of them communicates the lived experience of the Inuit in the harshness of their environment and the unenviable decisions about survival they are forced to make. As to Sedna's influence in the astrological chart, while it's natural for us to see everything in relation to the human condition, Sedna's distance from us and the length of her orbit go way beyond our anthropocentric mindset and the human lifespan. For me, Sedna relates to species survival rather than anything to do with the life of an individual, and not only our species, but the life of all creatures. All she asks is that we accept the realities of life on Earth as a matter of necessity, and our relation to the natural world.
And for more astrological and spiritual musings, check out moonletter.co.uk.